All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Brandon Gare with the National Minority Quality Forum with our Friday webinar series. This week, I'm super excited that we'll be talking about community leadership during COVID. We have two very special guests today that will be joined by Ms. Keys, who, before we start, I want to acknowledge her birthday. So happy birthday, Mia, and we'll stuff in the comments and make sure we're going forward. But real quick introduction of our panelists. We have Mr. Don Calloway. He works at or started a firm called Pine Street Strategies. Bit of a tongue twister. He's from St. Louis, Missouri, and at one point he was a state rep in the area. He has since come to DC, and he is also, in addition to his lobbying and law practice, he does a lot of political commentary on MSNBC and CNN. So we welcome him. And then we also have to welcome my hometown person, Aeneas Williams, Pro Football Hall of Famer, and we've done a lot of great work with the Pro Football Hall of Fame and traveling around the country, me and I, doing a lot of their youth initiatives, strong youth, strong community initiatives with Centene. And so without that, I'm going to turn it over to Mia, and she will lead us on the way.
Fantastic. And thank you so much, NMQF and Brandon and Dr. Puckrin and Keiko for just continuously giving us these platforms to discuss issues of significance, and especially given the moment in time, you know, when we're talking about really making transformative change and efforts toward change, such that it lifts everyone in our community, but especially those who, historically have just been downtrodden. It truly takes leadership. Leadership is one of the foremost pillars of ensuring that we move forward, but that we move forward together and move forward in a really very conscious way. And I really feel like this time is a period of consciousness raising for those who may not have been paying attention. And it's a result of a lot of our leaders, whether those leaders be state reps like Don Calloway, or whether they be pro athletes, Hall of Famers like Pastor Aeneas Williams. Everyone has a role to play in some form and fashion. So I'm really grateful to be joined today by Don Calloway, and as Brandon mentioned, he joins us from Pine Street Strategies, and where he's lead on the firm's tax and overall congressional advocacy, which is of course what we absolutely need, but then also in terms of media production practices. And so I'm hoping we can get into a conversation about how policy and media also converge with respect to generating and cultivating cadres of leaders and leadership. And once Pastor Williams joins us, we'll also be looping him into the conversation. But I have to say, as Brendan mentioned, I met Pastor Aeneas Williams some years back when Brandon and I would join the Centene Corporation team on some of their youth-related events. And so we would go across the country and we would engage with young people. Pastor Williams would always start off talking about why he does what he does, right? So he was a walk-on at Southern University his junior year, and then went on to win several seasons of within his tenure as a 14-year tenure and playing pro ball. And so the man has quite the story. Don has quite the story, and I am going to let them tell their story. And so, Don, I'm going to, of course, give you the first question. Hello to you, sir.
Hey, how are you? Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I'm grateful to be here. You know, these are interesting times, and I feel every bit my age, and I also feel the calling to do this work. I think we have a little friend nearby you who also might want to say hello.
No, young Coco ran away, so I finished my lunch, and therefore she was no longer interested.
Okay, all right. Well, we know where Coco's motivation comes from. But Don, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself in your own words, and then I'd like to segue into what you think leadership is in this moment, and how, especially COVID-19, and also just the overall tenor of the day is perhaps changing your approach to leadership.
Sure. So I'm Don Calloway. I'm the CEO and founder of two companies which primarily take the bulk of my professional energies and time. I founded Pine Street Strategies in 2016, and it is a comprehensive full-service public affairs firm where we engage in government relations, practice, media relations, and general public affairs practice. So if there is policy that needs to be moved from a legislative standpoint, state, federal, local, If there are elected officials whose campaigns we need to manage because we think that they will usher in policies that we want to see, or if there's just public affairs, kind of relationship management things for private sector clients, we kind of take all of those type of matters, but ultimately with the idea of moving forward progressive social policy that we think helps our Native African American communities. We are Washington, D.C. based, but we've done work all over the country. And we started to see as we managed campaigns that there were voter suppression issues that were rampant and pernicious and intentional all over the country that kept Black folks, for the most part, from having equal access to the ballot box, particularly in light of 2013 Supreme Court decision, which gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we started an organization called the National Voter Protection Action Fund, and it is a nonprofit dedicated to fighting voter suppression and expanding ballot box access for people in states and cities where where voter suppression makes a real difference. In other words, Milwaukee, 2016, 70,000 votes suppressed in Milwaukee County and in the city of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and we saw the outcome there by 30,000 votes. Pennsylvania, 30,000 votes suppressed in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and we saw the outcome there with respect to the outcome of the presidential election in Pennsylvania. Alabama, Arkansas, places where wide swaths of ballot boxes were closed as a result of the Supreme Court decision in 2013. So we run public affairs campaigns in the interest of expanding ballot box access and fighting voter suppression in those states. So that's kind of what takes up the bulk. There's my good frat brother, the good Reverend. That's kind of what takes care of the bulk of my professional time and obligations. I think that this is a crucial moment. And 3 months ago, when COVID hit, I think that those of us who call ourselves having a position of leadership knew then what has been revealed, which is when America catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia or worse. And the gross and savage and remaining and persisting inequalities of this country have been just dramatically exposed by COVID. I don't think that any of us understood going into this, back in late January, early February, when we first started hearing the words coronavirus, I don't think any of us really understood the extent to which it would have an effect on every single aspect of American, if not global life. What it showed us is that inequality and that unfairness is also present in virtually every single aspect of American life, if not global life. And what we've seen, unfortunately, sadly, what we've seen is as the world moves to open back up, and I do think that we have to start opening back up carefully and cautiously and to some degree. But what we've seen is the world is moving to open back up now because for the most part, the only folks at the greatest risk are Black and brown and poor people in this country. So it's a very sobering discussion on what lives we value most in this country every day, right? So now that Black and brown people are still having to ride public transportation to get to essential jobs, even though they're not being paid as essential, let's go ahead and open back up. Now that middle class people have high-speed internet connection and they've got their devices and they've got their routines squared away to educate their kids from home as well as to work from home, let's go ahead and open back up. Because the people who have to be out there and have to expose themselves to this virus, which by no means has been scientifically eradicated, the people who are most having to physically expose themselves to it are Black and brown people, right? And a couple poor white folks. But let's not sacrifice any future points on our GDP for those lives, to protect those lives. And that's where we're at. Now, you couple that with 8 minutes and 46 seconds in Hennepin County, Minnesota 3 weeks ago. And I don't want to get too deep into the scripture. I will leave that for Pastor Williams.
You can go there if that's where you wish to go as well.
But the Bible talks about the chronos and the kairos merging. The kairos being the spirit of the time and the chronos being the moment, right? So we have a situation where the spirit of incredible and rampant economic anxiety and economic unfairness is merging with the ongoing social inequity and racial unfairness, which is still in this country. And very literally, people are in the streets today because they ain't got nothing else to do. They got time, as y'all say in Black Girl Magic circles. We got time today. So at this moment in history is unprecedented because we as a people have time. And you add on the ongoing racial injustices in the police system, which needs to be reimagined because it was inherently racist from its birth as a mechanism to keep freed Blacks in place. You add that to this incredible, pernicious, and preventable, avoidable social inequality that COVID exposed. And we're really looking at an unbelievable time for all of us to witness in not only American, but global history. So what do leaders need to do? And I'm gonna have to dip out, but I will come right back. And I'll give the floor to Pastor Williams. I think in this moment, leaders are called to educate people. I think everything that comes out of our mouth needs to be telling people that the coronavirus is not over until there is a mass-produced and widely available scientific solution, that being a vaccine or a cure. Coronavirus is not over, and our people need to understand that because we are the ones that are still at the greatest risk. Number two, I just think we need to approach the world and approach each other with greater amounts of compassion than we ever have before. Because those of us sitting at home are going about our daily routines, but that doesn't mean that we are okay. You know, there is a substantial amount of pressure on everybody in this moment. I don't care if you have means or not, but there is specifically a substantial amount of pressure on those who are not of means, do not have career and life-sustaining jobs. And I think that we are called, as leaders, we are called, of course, to find long-term policy, but right now in the short term, we are called to show an extraordinary amount of compassion to each other, to check on each other, to care for each other, to donate to the churches and keep them sustaining, to give a couple of dollars that you would have spent at the bar to your neighbor who you know might not be making it right now in a way that they probably were sustaining or surviving a year ago or 2 years ago. Even though their positions were always something tenuous, I think that right now we are called to go the extra mile in caring for each other, particularly as a Black community, because the PPP is over. And that went to people who had means and who had businesses and who had opportunities to access that, right? And the government, no further government subsidy or program is going to save us. But those who are in leadership are called to organize and save ourselves.
Don, I think you really set us off a serious path here, and foremost appreciate all that you brought to the conversation just right there. I know that there's going to be a lot from the audience just off of what you've given us. I just want to briefly echo some of the words that you leave us with, which is the ethic of leadership is the ethic of compassion. They're one and the same. And I appreciate you mentioning to us that the moment meets the time that we have. And what we do in the moment is time sensitive, and how we use our time is certainly going to influence the moment. And I hope we do so with compassion. So thank you for setting us up.
I'll be right back, yo. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Pastor Williams, who I have to say is one of my favorite people who I've met within the last couple of years. And I've told you all about his career, but in terms of the manner of man you're dealing with, and you'll learn soon after he opens up his mouth, he's just an incredibly respected leader, role model, very tireless in terms of his outreach in the community, family man. I've had the opportunity to meet his wife and at least one of his daughters. And I'm just really excited and honored that he's joining us today. Pastor Aeneas Williams, welcome to you, sir. And I'll give you the same question after you tell us how you're doing. Tell us about what the moment necessitates in terms of leadership, and how is leadership being significantly transformed for you, and then and in terms of what the world needs.
First, Mia, thank you so much. And Don, I know Don stepped away. Thank Don, thank him for just, I would like to say is very good, well out thoughts as it relates to leadership and what the conditions are, even informed me even more with some of his comments. And also Brandon, shout out to Brandon for reaching out. And so good to see you, Mia. And when it comes down to leadership during this time, oh man, one of the first things that I was encouraged to do was to be silent. And really, Mia, I started going out in Ferguson doing the protesting this time last week. I would go out in the early morning hours, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, because I wanted to be not seen, no cameras, and I didn't do any public interviews, even though I was requested. I wanted to get in and find out who the influencers were among the young people, and then ask them, what's their story? What do I need to hear in order to know what steps to take going forward? Because as my dad, who's 74, my dad and mom, who are 74, who've been quarantined and stay at home for the past 4 months. My dad was around, obviously, he and my mom during the civil rights years. And he said, it's young people that will cause the pendulum to swing. It's the energy of young people, is what he shared, just like we were young during the civil rights movement, me and him, my mom and their peers. And it was our energy and our willingness to even not being fully abreast, but know something need to be changed. So now listening to the young people that I had a chance to talk with. So let me first talk about a young man named Sean. Sean was out protesting. Sean is 24 years old. When I initially walked up, all I did was just listen. And there are a number of young people of all ethnicities, African American, Caucasians, Asians, all a part of what I would say the Black Lives Matter group as for young people. There were 3 guys who were Christians. And by the way, I got there at midnight. These young people had been there since 4 o'clock that afternoon. There were 3 Christians that came at some point from that 4 o'clock in between the time I walked up that were in a lot of the young people's mind contradicting their movement and their chants. So these 3 Christian guys came and they were talking to these young people. We love you. We want to be a part of what you're doing. But while the young people were shouting their chant, the Christian guys were saying something over their chant. So when I walk up at midnight, young man Alex and Sean were having a conversation with one of the Christian guys. And Alex was real fed up. I mean, he was ready to fight somebody, right? He just upset. He said to them, he said, you guys came over on this block with the movement that we had, claiming that you were with us. But when I go over the video and I could show you, all I could hear was you guys chanting over us. So Alex says, so I'm telling you guys right now, you're not a part of our movement and you can't come on this side of the block. Whatever you're doing, just take it over there. And then Alex was so upset, the young people encouraged him to go home. So Alex ends up leaving. The young man, Sean, who I'm now referring to, end up talking with these Christian guys. And I just really was so encouraged by how Sean was able to communicate effectively what these guys had done wrong. And the first thing Sean told these guys, said the first thing you didn't do was when you got here, you didn't listen. The very thing that I was there to do was to listen, right? So I end up talking to Sean, realizing he's an influencer in the group. And I asked Sean, I say, tell me, what do you want to happen? I said, because you know, just as the Mike Brown situation, eventually the protests are going to be over. Eventually the cameras are going to be gone. But what do you want to happen as a result of your energy, your passions, and your effort? Sean says, I want to see the changes in how the law enforcement community governs themselves in communities. He says, I turned and stopped trusting law enforcement when I was 10 years old.
Mhm.
And he went on to tell me 2 stories that really had an impact on me as it relates to compassion, as it relates to, oh, I see what you're talking about. Even though I personally have not had those experiences, I was able to partake of empathy, because once I heard a 10-year-old young man with his friends playing football at night, being disrupted by some law enforcement coming through. Next thing you know, they're handcuffed, put on a curve, sitting down 10-year-olds, and it be from that day forward scarred as it relates to the trust of law enforcement, because 2 Caucasian cops in this community didn't understand the impact they could have on young people's lives the rest of their lives. So the leadership, I would first say, Mia, in a long way, I apologize for this
Oh,
long-winded.
no, you're good, please.
Yeah, for this
Mhm.
long-winded discussion. I want people to be able to, some people may say, I just don't feel all of this. Like, they're legitimate, like, I don't feel what everybody feels. I'm not crying. That could be an African-American, a Caucasian person, a Jewish person. It doesn't matter. The point is not that you're not crying, is taking the time to just listen to someone's story. And when I listen to the story, I'm not interjecting my thoughts as I listen. And so I asked Sean, I said, Sean, would you be willing to share with the chief of police, with Ferguson, who's a member of my church? So literally the next week, last Friday, sat down with the 2 of them, and it was amazing to behold, where there was literally civic discourse. There was a compassion shared in between the 2 in terms of how each were dealing with how to relate to each other, and hearing each other's stories. And then to hear how Sean tells me, I'll never be the same after this discussion that I had. So one of the, besides listening, the next thing is get the proper people together at the table, where we can first realize we're all human. And then those that are at the table, encourage them to use their influence to benefit those who are not at the table.
That's right. And you put it so succinctly there with respect to laying out leadership calls for listening, leadership calls for empathy, and both you and Don have mentioned compassion, but then also leadership does call for convening, right? Convening of other voices who can also be leaders within their sphere. So there's very much a parallel discussion of leadership here that you're laying out for us. I want to go back to the story that you told us just now about the 3 gentlemen who were Christian and who were chanting over the people who were throughout the streets of Ferguson. And I want to talk about that a bit more. You know, historically, when we're talking about social movements, spaces of faith have very much been either the center of social movements with respect to the civil rights era and so on and so forth, or in a lot of situations, spaces of faith have said, well, their stance has been be of the world but not in the world, and so therefore we don't touch anything with respect to civic engagement. And I will share with you, and I think I may have mentioned to you this before, my own personal faith. I am a Christian. I also lived in a Muslim nation for 3 years, the largest Muslim nation in 3 years. And so my concept of faith is very much rounded holistically by the way in which I grew up as a child, but in the way I really came to understand faith by being around persons of different faith. And one thing that I recall from a child, my mother would always say, be quick to listen, slow to speak, right? And that's biblical. And other faiths have very similar spiritual teachings. So when it comes to the convergence of the social movement and faith, you know, where does listening really, where does that have to take place? Where are you seeing successes of leaders within the faith community being great listeners and good stewards of information that those who are historically in the social movement, secular realm, if you will, what they're saying, and vice versa? Are you seeing really good leadership commitments to listening across across faiths or across secular and spiritual spaces?
Yes, we're seeing some, but also when it comes down to the listening part,
Mm-hmm.
Our faith, our following Christ Jesus, he introduces himself in the book of John as the Word, right? In the beginning was the Word. So that tells us how important words are. If you think about it, words can escalate or de-escalate something.
Indeed.
So the first thing is, when we're listening, is to understand what a person's saying when I understand what they mean by what they're saying. So there probably needs to be a discussion, Mia, on just how to listen, because it is not as easy as one would think to sit and really listen to what someone's saying without me drifting off, without me now stopping at some point because I've gotten offended at something they've said. It really is a skill to listen. So I am seeing listening, but I also understand how important the definition of words. But words are like a faucet. I should say words are like water coming out of a faucet. That water's coming from a well is just coming through a faucet. So the first thing is, people of faith, when it comes down to the church, our motto is Jesus. And literally, he was intentionally, if people argue a crazy discussion about Jesus poor or rich, he was intentionally poor. As it relates to, that wasn't his focus. He intentionally went around the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So if there was 99, as you know the story, he, by his father's direction, will go after the one. So part of the church, and let me just first deal with the church. The church is a body, and that body is under a head. And the body says if one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. So our Caucasian brothers and sisters, regardless of ethnicity, it may be comfortable, may not even be able to relate to it. But remember now, there's a part of the body that's now suffering. Some of the things that Don talked about. It's more than, and this goes back to understanding, it's more than charity. It's more than, okay, I take my church, I take my ministry, we're going to go feed the poor. That's an aspect of it. It's a whole nother thing when I now take structure and I take some things that will now help leadership, as Don was talking about, as you all are talking about with leadership. Let's go take some of what we know about infrastructure. And if they have a structure, let's see if there's something we can do to help their structure get better. In other words, notice the words I said. Let's not go give them structure because they have none. Right? Let's go see what kind of structure they have and see how we can help. So that goes back to even how I go to help. Am I going to, let's go help these poor people, to let's go help our brothers and sisters actualize their gifting, because we realize that if we don't help develop their gifting, if we don't make sure there's proper enforcement of the law through law enforcement, disproportionately, it's going to help hurt a part of the body that we're going to need. We're going to end up with one kidney when we should have two, because we think that the part of the other kidney that's in this other neighborhood of color, that other kidney we don't need. Well, that's what happens over now. And notice there's no language. And I've had to learn this with my children. It's a different when I come to my child and I said, you lied to me, versus why did you feel you had to lie to me? So the same thing, but look, one, I've now put them across the table, versus what do I need to do differently where you'll feel comfortable, where you don't have to tell me a lie. And that goes back to the verbiage of what I was talking about.
Yeah, you're really laying a plane for us today, Pastor Williams. And I want to continue with what you were saying with respect to listening. I think historically there's always been tension between elders and youth in terms of listening to whom. There's always been tension, as we just mentioned, between the secular and the spiritual spaces, and certainly within race relations. There's always this issue of listening, and it comes down to, and I think Don said it earlier in his opening remarks, It comes down to valuing who's on the other side of the table and really seeing each other as equal. And I'm specifically using the term equal here. But what I also want to introduce into this conversation is the concept of equity, which is different than equality, right? Equality really conjures that everyone receives the same thing, no matter what. But equity refers to that which is given as a result of recognizing what someone else needs or what another community needs. And if one is a part of the community that has resources to give, you give according to the needs of that other community. But to your point, it must be with the sense of equality in terms of viewing others as equally valued, but understanding that equitably distribution has not been the same. I want to talk to you about athleticism and your leadership in those spaces, because a lot of young folk these days, especially now that it's summertime, want to get outside. They want to go play, they want to go run, they want to kick it with their friends, that kind of thing. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to us about precautions or what should leadership look like in terms of the athletic sphere during the season of COVID-19 before the summer season really takes off, and especially in summer camps and so on and so forth.
Well, because so many people have to get outside, and as Don has said, yes, it is indeed true that this is not over. So now making sure that we pay attention to the people who study these things, pay attention to those people who put best practices. For example, a number of universities, the athletes, the football teams, they're going back, they're going to start practices. The NBA, a lot of our professional sports leagues, they're going back. But it's been through some well thought out, intentional thought as relates to, we probably will never be able to say 100%, maybe not even 90%. But could we get up to 80% as it relates to what are some of the things we need to do? What are some of the things the experts are saying that we need to adhere to, so we can at least do everything we humanly can do to make sure we have precautions, we have things in place that if at all possible, it will avoid anyone contracting the virus, and it will allow those who may be vulnerable, a part of what we call pre-existing conditions, to make sure we keep them away from certain environments, but still put some things in place where they can get some exercise as well. So the first thing is for those leaders, those coaches, to have the experts with them, not ignore them, not say, oh, we're going to get back to doing what we used to do. Because one slip up, two slip ups, all of a sudden now can shed a whole university now. So that's how important this is. So leadership with the coaches and them getting the information. I work with the league, same thing, having to adhere to what's being expected and what we now know. Now for those who don't have organized sports, my mom and dad, I'm constantly telling them, get out and walk. You need to walk. Get in the backyard and walk. If you're restricted to the house, walk around the house. The key to health is the movement of the body and the movement of food through the body. That's what I would share when it comes down to our health.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't have children of my own, but I have a slew of nieces and nephews, and I also have friends with children as well. And I'm sure a number of those who are on this call are thinking about, okay, well, how do I vacation safely? How do I travel safely during this summer? For those of us who have the luxury of hopping in our cars and going on road trips, right. Once you go and you arrive where you're going, how do you then also maintain safety there and without sacrificing fun, right? So I really appreciate you offering that. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about what you see moving forward for sport. I mean, a number of us on the calls, we have heavy duty jobs, during the day, and we look forward to vegging out a little bit on the TV or not
Right.
on the TV, but watching a good football game. We want to see what Aeneas Williams has to say about upcoming players for the next season. What do you think we have to look forward to? What will it sound like and feel like differently?
Well, if you were buying stock in a team and your stock would go up based on them winning the Super Bowl this coming year, I would tell you always bet on the jockey, not the horse. That means the coach. When you get a Patrick Mahomes with an Andy Reid, that's a dynamite duel. So that would be a team that I would say keep your eyes on, Mia.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to game of sports, I'm big on, part of my gifting is finding out the reason for things. I want to know the root cause. Because if I can find the root cause, if it's a good thing, I can keep it going because I know why. If it's a bad, I could possibly stop it because I know why it's bad. So sports, the word sports comes from our word entertain. Entertain comes from a word that literally means to divorce from the mind serious matters. To divorce from the mind serious matters. So why do we go to entertainment venues? Why do we have sports? Without knowing it, those sports are supposed to, football, for 3 hours. I don't want to think about politics. I don't want to think about this job. I don't want to think about all the minutiae of my life. And for some people, I don't want to think about all the madness in my life. I want to see these guys who've been practicing for 6 days. I want to make sure that these guys are training. And when I go into that stadium, they're giving me the best effort they have. On the basketball court, I want to see some of the most talented guys. I want to see them do things I wish I could do, right? That's what some of the fans are saying. Why? I want to be entertained. I want to see greatness in my sports so I can forget about a lot of the pressures on my life. So that's why sports has always been extremely important. 9/11, it was important to get back sports going, not because sports is a god or anything like that. It is an outlet that human beings need, and the public now, even though probably disproportionately in terms of finances, has deemed it important to the health of society to have an escape.
And I appreciate that breaking it down like that. The other thing I think about too when thinking of sports, in addition to the entertainment, is also that it's consistently been a site of protest. We can talk about the Carlos Williamses of the world, the Althea Gibsons, the Jesse Owens, the Colin Kaepernicks, and so I'm wondering, do we, for sports in particular, when we're looking at our leaders on the field, to what extent are we going to now see potentially a burgeoning of leaders becoming more outspoken off the field? And do you feel like our leagues are ready to receive that level of leader on the field and off the field? Like, say for instance, if you were scouting the up and coming young player, basketball, football, whatever, and they say I want to sign on to this team, but only as long as I can still be a leader in this social political space. Are the leagues ready?
I would say this is the perfect time, Mia, and let's go back a little background. Here's why I say this. At some point in America, at one time, the tycoons, the corporations ran everything, and the employees were come do our job, and we treat you any kind of way. Then the employees got together and formed unions. Then the unions start negotiating because of the power and influence of the employee. Now let's see if we can negotiate better deals that are now more equitable and beneficial, where it's a win-win for corporation and employees. Let's take St. Louis, for example. At some point in the past, maybe about 30 years ago, Mia, St. Louis was probably number 3 as it relates to automobile manufacturing. And the young people that were people of color who didn't want to go to college, graduate from high school, and have a viable job making a decent living, great benefits, and great retirement, it was a lot of automobile manufacturing companies. Well, guess what, Mia? 30 years ago, those who were leading the corporations, those that were leading the union, They negotiated deals that were not sustainable long term. So what ends up happening? A lot of our manufacturers end up taking their businesses out the country. So now that young man who's a part of that family no longer has that job once they graduate from high school. That job is gone. So now an adult who should have been gainfully employed in some of our manufacturing spaces don't have an opportunity for those jobs. So guess where they end up as parents? Working long-term jobs at some of our fast food restaurants, which were supposed to be stopgaps, not long-term solutions unless it was management. So those parents who had those jobs in those manufacturing business, their kids were able to work at the fast food restaurants to gain money, make money, and to start working at a lower level. But it wasn't a job that was supposed to be sustainable to run a family off of. So why am I saying that? In the NFL, I know in particular, at one point, it was us against them. Players against the league, league against the players. And either if we won league, then the players lost. Or, man, NBA or Major League Baseball, we players won, but the league lost. Now we're at a time we have to realize how independent we all are. Now, what do I mean by that? Every person is supposed to go through 3 phases of life. Every one of us. Every one of us, Mia, starts off totally dependent. When we come out the womb, if no one takes care of us, we die. Any parent worth their salt wants to get a child to what? Independent. You get off on your own, you can do it. But very few of us ever get to the highest level of how we're supposed to live. And we talked about earlier in a different way, is interdependent. When I realized it's not just players, it's not just league, it's how can we collaborate and be one? How can the church collaborate regardless of ethnicity and be one so we can do what? Get to the highest level of what's possible for us together, which includes a league that entertains in sports, which also includes a league that work together with players from these underserved communities to leverage the influence of both the league, both the owners and the players to do what? To cause the changes that could be made because of the 3 working together. That's where these voices come in. That's where instead of it's us against you, you're bad. No, how can we, this is the cause, police brutality. We just saw it with George Floyd, right? So now what we're saying is, let's work, let's collaborate. The league knows how to build cities, right? So hey, let's get together with this cause. Let's take our influence. Let's have skin in the game. Player, you're from this area. Let's have you put some of your investment, some of your time. And then we're gonna leverage the shield or the league to do what? To go in and help solve the problem, not accuse people. Let's go in, let's figure out how we can work together. So, because we don't want to disrespect the people that are there. Let's see how we can partner to solve this issue of disproportionate police brutality with some of the officers, not all of them. Many are being complicit, but it's only a lot of times a few who either need to be removed from the force or better trained. That's what's possible when we all come together.
Yeah, I appreciate you offering us, reminding us rather that as we go through life, we do move through phases. And I think it's more of a fluidity, right? There's dependence, independence, and interdependence. And for sure, interdependence is self-mastery in a lot of ways. I want to bring Don into the conversation as well. Don, and I'm wondering, both you and Pastor Williams are fathers, and your children are varying ages. Don, if I'm not mistaken, your boys are younger than Pastor Williams's children.
Yeah. I'm 8 and 11, and a 4-year-old baby girl.
Okay.
Shout out to you.
Yeah. So what's that, Pastor Williams?
Oh, and I was just going to tell you. So my oldest just graduated with 2 degrees, magna cum laude from Arizona State. My oldest daughter. Our second daughter is a junior at Webster here, and then my son just graduated from high school. He just signed track scholarship to Arizona State. So he's headed to Arizona State. And we got a baby girl who's a sophomore in high school.
That's awesome.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, you all are thriving in so many ways. And I appreciate just your model of not just leadership in the communities and in your spheres, but certainly within your families, at least as far as I can tell. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, what are the conversations that you have with your children? How do they sound, especially with you, Don, with your little ones who are in that dependent stage, as Pastor Williams mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. I think that I'm the same as every father. It's talking about being respectful, talking about get your lesson, talk about do a good day's work and act like somebody. But if I can get to what I think you're asking, which is how do you address the pain of the moment with my little guys, particularly young Black men who are child age, but young men? The answer is I don't know. And frankly, I have not done a good job of being able to do so thus far. Because I think that we have to be honest and tell ourselves, like, this is not a discussion that respectability politics solves. Speaking the King's English or having degrees or not sagging your pants are not fixes to police brutality. They're not fixes to systemic inequality. And I get very frustrated when I see us offering these individual respectability solutions to a system who doesn't give a damn what kind of degrees you have. Yeah. Because that police, excuse me for cursing, Pastor, but that
it's in the Bible.
Exactly.
All right now.
Because you know what? A police officer in a system that was built upon suppression and oppression of certain peoples doesn't look at you as, those boys didn't know if Ahmaud Arbery, they didn't know what level of education he had. They didn't know if he spoke the Queen's or King's English or not. What they saw was a Black man. And I'm very much struggling with how to come to terms with, my boys are not my cute little boys anymore. They are young Black men in the eyes of the world. So yes, I'm teaching them all the things about what they're supposed to be doing. But at the same time, I am flummoxed, bewildered, and flat out confused about how to teach them to address a system and a world that sees them because of their phenotype as a young Black man. Now, what I can tell them is that there are massive systemic inequalities, and I expect, the Greater Mount Carmel Baptist Church expects, Howard University and Morehouse, because they know that those are the only two options, Howard and Morehouse, their grandparents and my parents, we expect them to dedicate themselves to some principle larger than their own self-remuneration, right? Getting paid and having success for them in their house. We expect, and my sons do know, that they are expected to be a part of the solution of fixing rampant inequality in systems that currently exist in America and govern all of our lives. So we have started to teach them about the systemic inequality. We have started to teach them about the legacy of slavery. We started to teach them about they have a role in reimagining not only policing, but in reimagining the overall society that we all live in and participate in, and reimagining it in a way that makes it inclusive of all in a way that it has not been for the first 250 years of this American experiment. So I've talked to them a lot about that. I perhaps have failed in not speaking to them specifically about how to talk to or address police officers, right? Because I feel like that's not enough for what they need to be doing. And frankly, I don't know that the way they approach certain situations entirely matters or will save them. The best thing I can do, honestly, is just, I don't want to get too, I don't want to abdicate my responsibility in what I have to them. The best thing I can do is just pray for them and pray that they are young men who address the world respectfully, and the world envelops them with the love that I try to teach them to show to the world. But it's an entirely difficult, not even difficult discussion to have. It's a difficult thing to think about how to go about talking to them about what's happening in this moment and what their role in it all is. So I have just kind of tried to express to them that there are dramatic systemic inequalities in this world, and that they are expected to commit themselves to something larger than themselves, and they are expected to be a part of the solution.
Ashe and amen. I support that. You know, it has to be difficult. It has to be difficult. I don't want to put words on top of your words, so I'm going to let your words sit. But I do want to ask you both, as we're coming down to the last 6 or 7 minutes or so, in terms of your own edification, right? So well, let me back up. So Pastor Williams, you were talking about how you know, and I agree with you that there are people on the force, in particular in the police force, who have no intention of valuing the person on the other side of the power structure, right, as equal to themselves, right, and therefore they have no vested interest in equitable structure solutions, right. That's one thing. And Don, you're talking about how, you know, structurally there are things that have to change in order for your sons to be able to make the decisions individually to stand up as men in America who are Black, right? So I'm wondering, in addition to this, sounds to me like a toolkit that you've been, as leaders, that you've been carrying on, and then you're passing certain tools on to your progeny and to those you come in touch with. I want to know, how is it that you're edifying yourselves in this moment? Because you are not without pain. You are not without burden on your shoulders as leaders in your families and your communities and in your spheres of influence.
Wow, great question. In reference with the first question, when it comes down to the children, literally I spend time, we meet every morning at 8:30. Even our daughter that's in Arizona, she comes in on FaceTime. And we discuss it. We're all on a Bible reading plan, but we also read books. So the first thing I ask my children's generation is, how you feel? What are you feeling? Because a lot of times when we're growing up, I don't know how old you are, Don, when we're coming up, they didn't ask me a lot about my feelings, right? So I needed to find out, what are you feeling? And then I had to share with them what I was feeling. I didn't really know how to describe it, because I don't know, somebody can maybe clinically come tell me. It was just, it was almost like a numbness.
Mm.
But then going forward, I had to realize, as it relates to my dad and mom, growing up, they taught us, I grew up in Holly Grove, by the way, grew up same, Lil Wayne, all of us from the same area. And Birdman and I went to school together. That's just a point of reference in terms of where I grew up. And my dad and mom, they taught us something that's probably served me very, very well in life. And to respect authority, and I'm saying it like this, to respect authority, whether authority was having a bad day or a good day, because they're still human beings. So, and then, God gave us 10 commandments and not 10 demandments. Playing a game of football, there's testosterone, you get emotional, so it's easy to react and possibly cost your team a penalty that could hurt your chances of winning the game. So one thing we had to learn was how to bring this force, this energy, this me as a human being under control, even when someone else, an opponent or law enforcement, having a bad day or just are bad people. As Don said, there's nothing we can do to prepare our children to handle someone who's heinous, who has no consciousness, and just a rotten apple. What I shared even this morning with my children, Mom and I are not perfect people. The things that we share with you is because you see down the block, but we could see around the corner. What we share with them is our goal, if at all possible, is to help you avoid unnecessary setbacks, unnecessary heartache. Life already has those things just innate in life. But if I can avoid some, that would be great. So when I serve as senior consultant to the vice president of football operations and I work with the league and the owners. And the person that I serve, Troy Vincent, Troy's son plays at a university, one of the top schools in the country. His son just went back last week, and he had the talk with him, Don, and he called it the talk. And the talk was, if you get pulled over, hands on the steering wheel, already have your license and your insurance card at a place where you can reach it. And then when you're making movements, always alert the officer before you make the movement. Now, why would he teach him that? Not because he wants him to be subservient. He's only giving him these skills that you mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, Mia, a toolkit that when you get pulled over, here's the other thing we got to remember. People are constantly seeing African Americans always on TV. And a predominant amount of times you see it on the news, it's always something negative. So whatever people repeatedly hear or see, that's what they believe. What they believe is how they carry on in their lives. Slavery was carried on because Caucasian people were taught they were superior and African Americans were superior. That was how it was promulgated, even in many of the churches. We know the truth is that's not true at all. But a person who pulls me over may still have that belief. Here's another thought that comes to mind. Truth is like a pack of lions. It needs no defending. Truth is like a pack of lions. It needs no defending. Once I learned I can command your respect, Michael Irvin, I don't know if many of your audience may know who Michael, a Hall of Fame receiver, played with the Cowboys. We went at each other. Michael is one of the reasons I'm in the Hall of Fame, because of our going against each other. My rookie year, Don, Michael hit me across the face with an elbow. And if I retaliated, usually the guy who retaliates gets the penalty. I didn't retaliate. This is my rookie year. Mike is trying to intimidate me. So guess what? He's trying to demand my respect by hitting me. I didn't respond back. I played my technique and I handled him well. And guess what? I end up commanding Michael's respect. And so the same way, if a law enforcement pull me over, I want to dispel, if I can, I may not be able to. I want to dispel their encounter, even if they're having a bad day, even if they're heinous, if at all possible, through me inferring respect on them, even if they're not acting respectable. And I know not every young man has this. This is only for those that may be exposed to this, but those that are not, that's when we come in leaders and we want to do what we need to do to help those that didn't have the fathers, that didn't have the mothers, that didn't have the grandmothers, didn't have the coaches, to help them because they're angry. And when they're disrespected, they don't think I'm going to command your respect. Immediately the anger says, you're not going to disrespect me, and it ends up being far worse than we want it to be. That's where leaders, we want to use our influence to help change that, so some of our young people who maybe don't have that level of control, we can help on the officer side de-escalate things so we can have a safe child going home.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think that we're talking about, everything you said is absolutely correct, right, Pastor? But we're talking about how to survive encounters, right? Individual encounters with officers, be they, be they pernicious and heinous, as he said, or be they, more benevolent and acceptable. But I think that so I do think that the first conversation, and I will have this conversation with my sons, particularly as they start driving. Listen, son, your first objective is to survive the encounter, right? And your objective is to come home. And Aeneas laid out the points about how to do that. Don't make no moves without, announcing. So all of that is correct. But I think that the reason that people are in the streets right now is because they recognize fundamental inequality in the system that was baked in.
Right.
And with that, it's not enough to change the police officer or even root out the bad ones. With that, voting is not sufficiently cathartic of an exercise because voting changes the players without changing a system. And I think that when we talk about systemic racism and systemic racism and police brutality as a result of that and so on and so forth, when you have to address these things at a systematic level, that's when we're talking about having the courage to address sweeping, broad systems that have been baked into our very being that we get generationally. As proud of a Black man as I am, I still walk into all white spaces insecure because I know that they were gifted with the generational gift of white superiority and the irrational confidence that comes from that. And I was gifted with Black inferiority. I don't believe it, but I still got to get over it sometimes, right? Because that is just what comes down to us through the generations, and that we sometimes don't even believe that we are adequate. So we're talking about in this moment, you're seeing people in the street after the officers have been arrested, right? After they've been charged, you're seeing people in an ongoing posture of protest because there is a desire for large systemic change. And that's what defund the police is about. And abolish the police is a subset of defund the police, right? But that's what the moment is about, which is we want people and we want to elevate leaders like Aeneas. We want to elect officials. We want to listen to writers and hear from protesters and hear from advocates who have the courage to talk about systemic change, because we're done moving in a piecemeal basis, because that has not saved us. That has not saved George Floyd. That did not save Breonna Taylor, because you just changed the players and allowed them to continue to operate in a remarkably racist and inequitable system. So I think what I want to hear from in this moment is people who have the righteous courage to talk about broad systemic change. Now, that doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to get inches, right? To tuck the ball, tuck your head, and get inches, right? My job on every down, on every snap, while we still living in this system, is to get inches that turn into yards that turn into touchdowns, right? We are still obligated to move the ball forward, because we can't abdicate our responsibility to kids who are coming up right now and still striving and still thriving. But we should always keep our eye on the prize, which in this moment as a social advocate is broad systemic change. We have to have the courage and the righteous indignation to imagine a better world, because we can't imagine it, you can't demand it. And if you don't demand it, we'll never get there. Now, while we're talking about getting inches, I will say this. I'm going to close
it. And 2 minutes, because we're just over time.
I don't need 2 minutes. Give me 30 seconds. While we're talking about getting inches, let's identify some tangible wins that we can get. To me, I want my boys to play baseball. I want them to play tennis. And Aeneas Williams and I are both products of the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference. Southern University, Alabama A&M University right here. What happens when the next LeBron decides to go to Howard?
Right.
Decides to go to FAMU, which is now in the SWAC. I'll be recruiting them to Alabama A&M, right? And think about this. Every player is not an ESPN top 25 in football and basketball. But if you're going to be a D1 caliber player, will you have more fun at Southern University or Middle Tennessee State? You see what I'm saying? Will you have more fun at Alabama A&M University or Southeast Missouri?
What's that young man's name? Mikey Davis?
All that. That's right. So I want us, as part of the progress we can make on our own in our lifetimes, I want us to start choosing us. I want us to start embracing our institutions, and I want us to start believing that we are as good, we belong, we can compete, and we should be here.
I support that. And as a 2 HBCU graduate, 2-time graduate from the first HBCU in the nation, Cheyney University.
Hey.
Yeah, that's right. And then one of my graduate programs was at Meharry Medical. And on the other side, I also studied at Oxford University, and Vanderbilt University. So the gamut. And I'll tell you, in terms of my education, it was what I got from HBCUs for sure. And that's someone coming to tell me happy birthday. But so I am going to close here and foremost say thank you both so very much for the jewels that you've dropped. I just want to give a brief summary of what you told us, the spirit meeting the times, and leadership calls for an ethic of listening, an ethic of compassion, and really showing up and ensuring that we're having parallel conversations at the table. And you both set that example quite well in your spheres. And let's definitely push together, not just for internal individual change and interpersonal relationship development, but also those structural systemic changes that also need to take place. So thank you so much for both of you, and I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Hold on, Brandon, before we turn it over. Mia, Don, you notice Mia just glossed over. It's your birthday.
It's your birthday, yeah. Oh,
yeah. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mia.
Happy birthday in the Stevie Wonder version. You deserve it all.
Happy birthday to you. Absolutely. Always.
Thank you. Happy birthday, lady. Don, thank you so much.
Salute my brother.
It's been a blessing, man.
Thank you all.
HBCU, shout out. It's been awesome. Look forward to doing this in the future. Great job moderating, Maya. Happy birthday.
Appreciate you.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I do want to mention, though, that I am a product of both Alabama A&M, my grandmother, and Southern University, my mother. But, so I'm always going to go with Xavier first, though. We all know that. All right, everybody have a good day, and thanks so much for the word today.
God bless you all.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Bless you.
Thank you.
To you.